So yes, I was just going to give a very brief recap of what we've been doing over this series. So we've been looking, well, particularly the interviews actually, I was thinking, so we've had a series of interviews over the last few weeks. So we've been looking at the 5 stages of the sort of spiritual path, so to speak. So there's been integration, so the process of really getting to know ourselves, getting to know our bodies, getting to know our thoughts, our minds, and then the process of positive emotion, we've been talking about it, or helpful intention. So developing loving kindness, in a way really taking responsibility for our mental states, and working in the realm of ethics. And that's also working, so at the same time that we've been looking at the stages, the 5 stages, we've also been looking at the 5 niyamas, so the 5 different levels, if you like, of the way conditionality works, of the way the world works, in a way. So you can see integration as very much sort of in the realm of biology, physics, sort of our instinctual makeup. And then it's not quite as clear-cut as this, but I'm just sort of summarising it a little bit. And then sort of working with positive emotion, helpful intention, skillful intention in the realm of karma, the karma niyama, the kind of law of conditionality that says if you behave in a kind way, in an unselfish way, you will experience positive states. We sort of looked a little bit at that, how that you can have some sort of quite direct, sort of quick experiences of that, of just feeling like if you give something, how that feels within yourself. Does it feel open and spacious? So we looked at that, and in a way you could stop there in the sort of spiritual path. You could become quite a happy, perhaps quite content person at that point, but there's so much more. There's so much more that is possible. And in a way, that's what we start to explore when we're looking at spiritual death, which is what Viryajyoti was interviewing our Siddhi about last week. That point where you start to really see things how they are and go beyond yourself, in a way. Start to really explore the realm of whether you have a self, the idea of me, mine, start to see how much we're kind of clinging to that. And I think you do sort of start to get a sense of that in those early stages of the integration and the positive emotion. I say early stages, in a way they're all interlinked. It's not really a linear path. They all kind of feed into each other, but it can be easier to sort of talk about it in terms of, just for the sake of sort of explicating it a bit. So you were talking with Artisidi last week about what happens when you get yourself out of the way, actually. Maitreya Bandhu, I was reading a little bit in the Journey and the Guide, he's got this fantastic expression, beyond the drama of me. So what happens beyond the drama of me? And that is what we're going to be looking at this evening. So you sort of create this space, you sort of get yourself out of the way, in a way, and then what opens up, what happens next. And it's the realm of the Dharma niyama, so the sort of the law of conditionality that is very mysterious, famously beyond words and concepts. So Viryajyoti and I are going to be doing our best to talk about that in the second half. So I think, we'll want to explore a bit the experiences, but also I think in a way how we can relate to that in our lives, what that can bring for our lives in terms of meaning. So that's what we're going to be exploring in the second half this evening. So, I've done that quicker than I thought I would. Well, there we go. We can have a little bit of an early tea break, and we'll come back a bit later and I'll interview Viryajyoti, and she'll tell us all about spiritual rebirth is the name of the stage, so to speak. So we can all be reborn in the second half. Okay. Thank you, Smudragosha. And I've got a clipboard, so all is well. Gives me a false sense of security. I know what I'm doing.
You do. You've got the clipboard.
Yeah.
We said that earlier, didn't we? All is well.
Yeah,
Kalyanadhi's got the clipboard.
So yes, welcome back from the tea break. So we're going to, I'm going to interview Viryajyoti. I'm going to ask her some questions about, some aspects around spiritual rebirth, basically. Just going to have a little explore, I'd say. But I thought I would start by a quote from Subhuti talking about spiritual rebirth, which really struck me. It was sent to me by Artisidi. Thank you, Artisidi, who's on Zoom. But when he's talking about it, he says, "It's the fulfilment of your life to which you are content to give yourself up to." I'm going to say that again. So, spiritual rebirth, what you're kind of stepping into, it's the fulfilment of your life to which you are content to give yourself up to. So I thought maybe we could explore that a little bit, Viryajyoti. And I thought maybe one way, can I just say how delightful it is to be interviewing you?
Well, it's very delightful to be interviewed by you.
Well, we'll see.
Yes.
Yes. You don't know what's on my clipboard.
Good point. Yeah.
So I thought maybe to put it in context or something, shuffle back a little bit, maybe thinking back, like before you met the Dharma, and was there, or what was the sense of fulfilment in your life? Was there a sense of being content to give yourself up to anything, or a sense of contentment? I just wonder if there's...
Before I met the Dharma?
Before you met the Dharma, yeah, if that featured in any way in your life.
I think it's so hard to know, isn't it? Because I had no idea what would happen when I met the Dharma, sort of thing. And so I was living a life without that in my experience. And I wouldn't say I was content. You know, obviously there would have been things in my life that I would have enjoyed and things like that. But I wouldn't say I was truly content. And I was troubled by different things, you know, in the world and stuff like that. So, troubled by things that happen, you know, in the world. And so no, I wouldn't say I was content. And I think, you know, that used to manifest in me moving and doing different jobs and things like that, and looking for something through work, or, you know, through particular things in my life that I enjoyed. But I can certainly remember a point where I thought I had everything I thought I would ever want, and it still wasn't really right, or something like that. There was still something missing, but I had no idea what that was, of course. I wouldn't have I don't know if I'd have even gone around saying I think there's something missing, but I think, you know, just by judging by what I was doing, I was looking and trying things, and then aware that I still wasn't satisfied, restless, you know, there's a restlessness or something.
And so I suppose, in a way, we'll go back to a bit more detail about the sort of conditions and things, but in a way, fast forward to now.
Yeah.
And is there a sense in your life of a fulfilment of your life to which you're content to give yourself up to? Do you have a sense of that in your, in your being, in your world, and how you live your life?
That there's something I want to give my life to, sort of thing. I want to give myself up to. No, absolutely. No, definitely. Definitely. So, I think the thing for me that's been so interesting about practicing over the years is that it's infinite, it's endless. There's this sort of endless sort of possibility, or this unfolding or something that's got that just keeps going and is so satisfying, and it keeps going, it keeps unfolding. And I think then the more that becomes evident, the more sort of one thinks, this is it, this is what I'm doing with my life. This is what it is. And that is really seriously fulfilling and meaningful. So it's a very different thing to having that sort of restlessness and looking around at all those, trying to do this, trying to do that, change job, do training, blah, blah, blah. It's just got an entirely different experience. Yeah.
So I wonder if we could perhaps explore a bit the conditions that brought that about. So going from that, what you're describing, that sort of wandering about, sort of changing a lot, and then, I think we've been looking quite a lot at the different conditions in this series. But I was thinking about, because obviously it's a gradual process, sort of unfolding in all the different ways that we've been talking about: integration, positive emotion. But I wonder if you have a sense of, or any sort of particular things that sort of supported this sort of emerging sense of maybe something bigger. I don't know if you would describe it as something bigger, or sort of a bigger vision, or something that's bigger than you, that you would want to give yourself to. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just thinking how to... Because in a way, I think I didn't really know what I was doing. If it's sort of happening, and now I feel, 20 odd years on or something, I can look back and see things that, stages in my life or conditions that were there. At the time, I don't know if I was so aware of what was happening, but something was happening. I don't know if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
And I just think this sort of unfolding sort of satisfaction or something, or happiness, or just trying to think of a particular example or something about something bigger. Well, I think, noticing over time, to start with, it felt very much like I was meditating and practicing ethics and things like that, and quite strongly having to put myself into that, if you see what I mean. And sometimes I found meditation difficult and things like that, so it's quite challenging. But there must have been something that just kept me. I knew that there was something in this. It's so hard to describe, isn't it? From the outset, I knew that there was something in it that I was going to follow. And I could see that I was becoming freer of ideas about myself and the world. I could see that was happening. And it was, it was quite challenging difficult at times, just, I don't know if this is sort of making sense, but I could tell, I knew that there was more than what my experience was at that time. And how did I know that? I suppose I knew that just through doing the practices and meditation, beginning to notice how my mind, I think I talked with Artisidi when he interviewed me about realising that I had all these thoughts going on in my head, and a bit like he was saying last week, actually, that I definitely didn't have to follow them. That they weren't actually real in a sense, and that the person who I thought I was just an idea. So I think there was that sort of sense of freedom coming or something, and recognising there was always more, more possibility, more potential. And I was very drawn by the story of the Buddha and the Buddha's enlightenment. And and just the Buddha being a human being, and then having these experiences, that really captured me, and was a guide for me in a sense.
I was wondering, sort of thinking about those conditions and that development. So, how your maybe decision to become an Agarica, and you might want to. Maybe not everybody will know what an Agarica is, so you might want to explain a little bit of that. This is why Viryajyoti has a golden caser. If that sort of decision to put yourself in those sorts of conditions has sort of played a part in that, well, that freedom that you're talking about, I guess, and sort of serving a greater vision. Don't know. That would be your experience.
Yes, just sort of, just thinking about that and thinking, when I was ordained, everybody who's ordained in Triratna is ordained with a white caser, and becoming an Agarica is something you actually ask for. You want to do it later in your practice. What to say about that? So an Agarica, so it's like we're all practicing as order members. We practice the 10 precepts, and the third precept is about abstaining from sexual misconduct and cultivating stillness, simplicity, and contentment. And some people in the movement choose to follow this path of not being in sexual relationships, of celibacy, and choosing to do that. And I chose to do that. That was something, and that came out of watching this film called Samsara. I lived in yeah, it did. I lived at Taraloka, a women's retreat centre, and we watched this film Samsara. So it's a marvellous film, but it's quite a watch actually. And afterwards, I couldn't watch the whole film because it shows the beauty in the world, and it also shows what's going on in the world. And some of those things were very, very hard to watch. Particularly things around animals and animal farming and things like that. I found that really hard. So I couldn't watch the whole film. And then somehow out of that film, I just knew that my response was this. And it's very hard to describe that, but I can remember being on a retreat over the road at Taraloka, because I was living in the community and we had the retreat centre and putting on retreats. And I can remember being on a retreat and meditating and knowing that this was my response to live more with simplicity. This was my response to what was happening in the world. And I think it's one of those interesting things where does that come from? It's sort of like, it wasn't like I was sitting there thinking about it. It was more like, it was like an answer, a response or something to something inside me. And I can't explain it more than that. And then I spent quite a lot of time exploring that and thinking about it before I took the step. But that was the catalyst. Sort of not knowing what to do in response to something. So I think that is something big. It's like something else comes, like, okay, it's that. That's how I want to practice in my life, or that's the way to practice that can answer some of this. I didn't really know how, but that was it was something about the stillness, simplicity, and contentment. And I think there was the other element that was very interesting for me in that was this about being able to love all beings. So that was very strong part of it, not having, I hadn't been in a sexual relationship for years anyway, so that didn't make a lot of difference. In a sense, I wasn't giving up a sexual relationship, I'd given that up. But it was more like, okay, there's this possibility of actually really cultivating friendship or love for all beings. And I love that thing about Bhante where he says you can be a friend to anybody. But for me, it was also animals. It was the whole thing. Yeah.
I find that very moving, very beautiful. I was also thinking about so I wonder if obviously it's really interesting to me that we're doing this interview now when you've just stepped down from a position of big responsibility, actually, the Women's Mitra Convener here. And you've been doing that for 6.5 years, very intensively. We have a very large Women's Mitra Sangha here, so it's a very huge job that you've thrown yourself into very wholeheartedly. And I just wonder, this notion of sort of service, sort of serving, I wonder if you sort of were drawn to do that role because of wanting to serve a higher vision or sort of serve the Dharma in some way, if that played a part. And if sort of whilst you've been doing that work so intensively, if there have been particular times maybe within that you felt yourself going beyond yourself in a way, because the situation has demanded it of you, you've kind of put yourself in those conditions. Yeah,
I think it's like, I think when I hear the words like, doing service or something like that, it doesn't really say it doesn't really have an effect, but there is something in that. There's something, because when I was at Tara Loka and I heard about the Mitra Convener post, and I just had, again, it's like there's this sort of feeling, that's what I want to do with my life. And it didn't feel like a big thought process. It was more like that is where I'm going or something, or that's what I'm following. And I think it's very interesting, I think, as your practice unfolds or something, that you start off, you're guiding it a lot. And then I think it is this thing that something else starts to come in. And then that's guiding you, you're listening to what your being is telling you to do, or something like that. You're being guided into something, and then you follow it. Or I think there's something of that in it. There's this: what is the draw? I came over here, and then I become Mitra Convener, and it felt like I was in the right place at the right time. And I think it was those sorts of things that maybe this thing that something else is coming in. Because at one time, I think my life, sort of pre-Dharma and early Dharma, was probably very much shaping it. Whereas at some point it seems like it's being shaped by something, and you're more in line with what you need to do, or something like that. So it doesn't ever feel like an effort or something like that. It's not like I'm going to go and do that. It's more like there's a following something. And what is that? It's like, I find that very interesting. And I think it's something about you starting to know or tune into something, or your being's tuning into something, and you're responding to that.
So you're responding to that sort of, almost maybe mysterious, I don't know, but that sort of pull to so it's interesting that it kind of brought you here, and then I imagine, but you can say whether it did or not, it gave you sort of, you put yourself in a particular place where you then get quite stretched in terms of perhaps the drama of me, going back to that phrase. You just get quite stretched in needing to sort of go beyond that in order to
Well, I think the drama of me played out many, many times.
Well, yes.
Many people have witnessed the drama of Viryajyoti. I had many dramas, I can assure you, when I came to Cambridge. And, at different times there were different dramas going on. And and I can remember saying to Ratnagosha, who was chair at the time once, I said, oh my goodness, this is all going on in my life, and I'm Mitra convener. There was so much going on, there was so much sort of happening. And then sort of meeting that, with friendship, I think, being part of the team, and this Sangha, just, and all the women, and the guys, of course, as well. But the women, because that was my sort of focus. Something about that. Well, I was saying the other day about doing Buddhism too, with Samudra Ghosha, actually. And I can remember giving a talk once and going home and I felt mortified. I gave a talk on Ratnasambhava and I went home and thought, oh no, that was a dreadful talk, and I couldn't sleep, but just, talking about those things and again, just sort of meeting that part, that sort of part, that more conditioned part of oneself, and then something else being freed from that, and then just seeing that, that whole thing with, just the being mortified is just an added thing, and just becoming a bit freer. And of course it still happens, things happen, but over time just being freed up by the stretch, and sometimes getting things wrong and being blamed and things like that, and having to work with that, and all that going on, but all the time the Dharma was always there, and then I think I think there was the point where I said I realised that all I had to do was practice, and I still get into tangles and mental knots and have a bit of drama. Liz will vouch for that, 'cause she lives with me, and friends will vouch for that. I have my moments. But also, I don't take those moments so seriously. They're not. Then, like Artisity was saying last week, you start to notice these things do not. If you really look at what's going on, and it's okay. Things are okay. And that has more and more come through the stretch. So I think the intensity of the situation has really helped. I've been, and Artisity, I know he's up there with the Zoom things, but because Artisity and I have worked so closely together as well, and we've had our moments. Well, you and I have had our moments, haven't we?
We have.
But we get, then something else comes, and there's a freedom in realising, it's okay. Actually, that was just my conditioned stuff meeting your conditioned stuff. And I don't have to go with that. And there is something more that's beyond that.
And then sort of you talking about, all I need to do is practice.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you're in that situation, but it wouldn't be enough just to be in that situation. You have to be deeply resourced by practice in order to grow with that stretch, I think. Otherwise you just kind of burn out, or you just wouldn't be able to.
I just don't think you could do it.
No.
I don't think it's possible to do. You can't just sort of think it up or something like that. I think it's got to come from practice.
So I wonder if there's there's various things, isn't there, I've written down for you, that sort of, I don't know, can perhaps keep you in touch with, or keep you inspired, or a flavour of this sort of what is possible, this bigger expanse that we're talking about, the sort of rebirth. So whether it's images of the Buddha, or ritual or meditation or friendship you've mentioned, reading, study, I don't know, are there particular things that you find help keep you in touch with, when you're in the everyday nitty-gritty of things?
Well, the Buddha has been a constant throughout, I think, from the very, very beginning. And I think, over time, as, one of the things with Buddhist practice is, really trying to develop or cultivate the imaginal sense and experience of the Buddha. And I think that's been a very important practice, that, and that at one time I used to think, well, how could you ever do that, but then I realised, okay, you can, and I can imaginatively feel the sense of the Buddha's presence in different situations, if the going gets tough, sort of thing. When I came along, because people talk about the different Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the archetypal Buddhas and things like that, and I used to think, what is all that about? I really did not understand why anybody would ever be interested in all of that. But then, on ordination, you take a practice, a sadhana practice, and I took the practice of Vajrasattva. And Vajrasattva was a figure when I was in my ordination training period. I can remember being on an ordination training retreat, and I was still very, very awkward. I found it very difficult to be in groups. I didn't know what to say. I never felt I was good enough and all that sort of stuff. And I can remember that really manifesting, particularly on a retreat. And then it was going to be a Vajrasattva puja. And they asked for volunteers to do the shrine, and I'd never done it because I'd never felt I could. And then I volunteered to help. But then when I started to do it, I felt really awkward. And all my, this sort of conditioned awkwardness was there. And I didn't know what to do, and the other person was very confident. And it was very, very painful experience. And I can remember that night in the puja, we had this puja to Vajrasattva, and that was the first time I felt that it was like I sort of had to give up something, like I couldn't do this thing, but there was some possibility of going beyond that. And we talk about going for refuge, and I went for refuge that night in a way that I'd never done. And that was the beginning of this. And the practice of Vajrasattva is very much about everything is always been pure. Everything, it's about conditionality, that everything is actually just a process of flow, and there's nothing impure. And that was a very sort of a significant practice for me. And over time has changed. It started off in a particular way of helping me deal with things I felt uncomfortable about, and then moving more into like everyone, all beings are, inherently pure, in the sense of that there's nothing there to grasp. It's beauty. It's an unfolding and a process, and that people are operating often out of their conditioning, but that isn't them. And so that has been more and more significant, that isn't them, it's conditioning. And the same for myself. So I think then through Vajrasattva there's this contact with something, the vastness of the unconditioned, which essentially we are. And I think that's that, and the whole teachings on conditionality really. Jackie will know that, and I know her partner says, "How long will it be before Viryajyoti mentions conditionality?" Not long. But I think for me, because that's been the path to freedom. There was all the other practices which are inherently very, like you say, the integration, positive emotion, all of that. But then, more and more understanding conditionality and how it plays out in me and in other beings. that it's not inherently real.
Mm.
And so that has been the greatest boon. So I think going forwards it's more like I want to understand that more and more deeply in my being, to know conditionality, what this teaching is about. And of course you can go for endless, just keep going with it, keep going, understanding, deepening your understanding of the practice. What it actually means to there need be no self.
Yes. Yes. So I think in a way, you've just answered my next question, which is what keeps you going on the journey?
Dukkha?
Good old dukkha.
Well, now I think there's enough momentum. Now I think that my practice is much more on a joyful basis. So the dukkha was a primary driver for me, definitely in the early days, just the level of my own dukkha suffering, but then more and more just seeing the suffering everywhere. But now I think, what's the question again? Sort of what keeps you going?
What keeps you on the journey?
Well, I think it is like, I think it's that point where you're going on the spiral path and dukkha becomes shraddha, or faith, faith in the practices. And so my faith in the practices has just grown stronger and stronger. And I think one of the things of being here as Mitra convener as well has been like seeing everybody else practicing, and what happens when people practice the Dharma brings a huge amount of shraddha. And I think then that shraddha fuels itself. It's like, it becomes more and more. And then there's the spots of dukkha that just remind you, suddenly there's something else happens, and it's a big reminder. I notice my response to it or something, and then I'm reminded that I'm not totally liberated. So that then makes me want to practice more deeply, and so that we all have dukkha, don't we? All have difficulties, but there's been I've experienced some big difficulties, and that just makes me want to go beyond that. But for not just for me, but all the people around me as well, and just for all beings.
Yeah. I think I was just reflecting, because we've been looking at these integration, positive emotion, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth, but of course then there's just sitting, which we haven't said a massive amount, but it's 50% of what you're supposed to be doing. Apparently, according to Subhuti. And I just because we're just talking as you've just stopped being women's Mitra convener, stopped being very busy, actually. And I feel like potentially you're entering into a period of just sitting. I don't know how, And I just wonder how that feels, really. If it feels like that, it might not feel like that. But sort of you've decided to sort of, now is the time to step down. And my sense is that there are things that you just want to perhaps go deeper into conditionality. Well, I'm sure you do, actually, just from listening to you talk. But sort of perhaps absorbing and reflecting, and I don't know if that's what it feels like to you. I'll be interested to know. You might not know yet.
Yeah. I anticipate there's aspects of my experience that I'm not fully aware of yet, or something like that, and that they might, something else is going to come to light. And there is, just sitting, I think there'll be some of that, but I suspect, you know, there's more to be known or something from having a different experience. And I think that's what I feel I'm mentoring into. Another space or something.
Yeah, kind of opening out into another
phase. We'll see.
I know. I'm very excited to see what's going to happen next. Thank you. Well, I think we'll draw it to a close there. Thank you so much, Viryajyoti.
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking me questions.
Anytime.
No, thank you for putting so much thought into them as well.
So what we could do now is have some little groups.